metadata time, baby. Let's have a look. Let's get that data going. This weekend was what we like to call fairly busy. It wasn't 800 plus, which tends to be like a mega weekend, but the fact that we are now sort of settling into like 700 to 800 people starting to be like the new normal, it's a pretty good showing of like the growth in the competitive community. I mean, a quiet week used to be like 300. Now a quiet week's like 500. A busy week used to be like 700, 800. Now that's sort of an average week. So it's a fairly active weekend with 779 players and 4,001 games of 40k being played. Now, not to give too much away, but you can't help it. Looking at these columns, you've got weekend win rate, how many players went X and 1, number of tournament wins over the weekend, the average win rate over the last 9 weekends, number of players, wins, and games played. So with that in mind, to absolutely no one's surprise, coming in stone cold last and showing what happens when you create a faction, which is basically just a 30 quid tax for your digital app, it is Imperial Agents! Oh no. Oh dearie me. I don't think I've ever seen a faction with a 0% win rate before. Like, fair play to this one guy who took them. Yeah. This one guy. And he went a solid 0-5. Does it surprise anyone? The faction has basically 0 anti-tank in a meta of vehicles and monsters. I mean, it's real tough. With Imperial Agents, I would fix the entire thing with two small changes. I would just add 2 data sheets. I would add Inquisitorial Stormtroopers, and I would just copy and paste the Scion data sheet in there, giving them a cheap, deep striking, secondary achieving, go-getting unit, as well as making them battle line, as well as making them potentially have a source of useful damage dealing battle line with like melter guns and plasma guns and stuff. Cheap battle line, I should say. And then I would add in Land Raiders. I think add in Inquisitorial or Imperial Land Raiders. I personally think anything it should be like the Imperial Rhino. Anything should be able to go inside of it. It should just have the assault ramp. It should be completely copy and paste Land Raider, as we've seen for pretty much any faction that can wield them. And the reason why I think that would be an important addition is that it would give the give the Imperial Agents long-range anti-tank in the form of the las cannons, and it would also give them heavy armor, so they'd actually have a unit that can take a punch, and it would give them something. It would just give those two things really: a bit of heavy armor and a bit of range anti-tank, as well as being a decent transport for things like Terminators. But without those two things, Imperial Agents is just a bit of a shit show really. And the Codex is a bit of a shit show, unfortunately. It's a bit of a shame. To be fair to the Agents of Imperium guy, he's playing Index Imperial Agents, so he may as well not even have an army rule or any strats or any Deathwatch Grey Knights as the battle or vehicles to use. Good point. This very well may be Index Imperial Agents, or like I said, it may be that he is using the Codex Imperial Agents because his tournament, his TO may have let him do that. It's just because BCP hasn't updated yet to reflect that the codex. Maybe, or maybe he just filled in the BCP thing wrong and just left it as an index attachment. Very possible to do when I could go to a tournament, sign up as a Space Marines and submit an Imperial Guard list, and my wins for this data would go towards Space Marines. Yeah. Then we get to Chaos Knights. A bit of a surprise to see Chaos Knights down here. Not a good week for them. Chaos Knights with a 35% win rate. Now, something that we said, now this is against an average of a 45% win rate. 29 players is okay player numbers, but just a bad weekend. Now, what could be causing this bad weekend? It could simply be a blip. It could simply be a blip. It could be part of this boom and bust cycle that we've seen Knights going through, where sometimes they suddenly shoot back up to sort of 45-50% win rate, and then for a few weeks, and then they go back down to like a lower win rate. Being 35% is very low, though. I can't help but wonder if there are potentially, I wouldn't put too much into it. If we see this pattern continue, I would suspect it comes down to one of two things. Knights have been having a bit of a resurgence recently, whether they're Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights, and people might just be getting used to bringing enough anti-tank to deal with the Gatekeeper, which is Knights. Or it could be that we're seeing a real prevalence of combat armies at the moment, things like Blood Angels, World Eaters, which tend to go through Knights quite effectively because Knights only have a 3-up save, and they don't get an invulnerable save in close combat. So if you've got some AP -4 weapons, you just go straight through these big things. Now, what we may be seeing here, and again, pure speculation. Never put too much stock in 1 week's worth of results. Again, if we see Chaos Knights down here next week and we see lower player numbers again next week, maybe we can start drawing a trend here, or maybe they'll be bouncing back up next week and this is all be a little bollocks. Coming in the bottom 3 here, third from bottom, we have a surprise. Adeptus Mechanicus. Admech not having a good week. So despite GW's, once again we find Admech down dumps. Now, sure, this is probably a bit of a blip, bit of anomalous data, somewhat appropriate for this faction. 38% win rate this week versus an average of 48% over the last 9 weeks. You know, we had a couple of people that were able to go 4-on-1 with the faction, specifically using Skitarii Hunter cohorts. Looking at the different attachments, Skitarii Hunter cohort got a 40% win rate, so that is lower than its average of 50%, but it's still by far the most popular faction, the most popular detachment within the faction. Cohort Cybernetica and Rad Zone Core both did very poorly, despite what you may think, and despite what some Admech players may protest when I say this, but have been one of the most well-serviced factions in 10th edition. And what do I mean by that? Because it's very important for me to clarify that. I'm not saying they've been given good tools. I'm not saying they've been given, good points or good rules or anything like that. But GW has pretty much constantly, since the launch of 10th edition, been working on them. Now, sometimes these buffs, faction, were fairly simplistic, like points reductions, but they're also a faction which has received like a fundamental rewrite in many ways. They got the big overhaul. In fact, in many ways you could argue they've had 2 big overhauls, because firstly they got their codex fairly early on, which didn't seem to fix anything. And then, but there was more stuff in there for GW did get them that codex early on, did give them more options. And then even after the codex in the recent balanced data slate, they got a big core overhaul to how the faction works and everything. So they've had constant points changes, they've had a codex. I wonder, I guess their aesthetic is unique, but I wonder if their playstyle is interesting enough this edition. So Eldar are definitely a faction that are in the descendancy. Eldar 41% win rate, 29 players, 3 of which were able to go 4-on-1, but no one won a tournament. Their win rate is 6% down their 9-week average, which is 47%. I actually do have some insights on Eldar. They're too expensive. I'm talking points wise. Every Eldar army that I seem to encounter has about 2 turns worth of juice in them. And after 2 turns of back and forth firepower, their army just completely runs out of steam and momentum. It might sound simplistic, but I think the Eldar Fate dice are fine now. The inbuilt reroll is okay. What I would probably do with Eldar is I would make the inbuilt reroll like an either or, so you use it to roll either a hit, either a wound, or either a damage, but not and 1 hit, 1 wound, 1 damage. And then I would lower the points significantly. So you balance it out so they get more units in their armies, they've got more assets, they've got more ways of doing objectives cheaply, but they're not getting a whole glut of free rerolls in their army. It's sort of, one goes up, one goes down, and so average it out, it stays. And then we have got, to no one's great surprise, Space Marines coming into the bottom 5. Rounding out the bottom 5, we have got the Emperor's second finest. It is the Space Marines. Emperor's least finest at this point. It is the, well, no, I guess the Admech are technically Emperor's least finest this week, but yeah, Space Marines consistently Emperor's least finest. They've not actually really shifted their position much. If anything, they've got slightly better this week. 41% win rate against an average of 40%. I mean, technically it's 1% higher. The reality is that's just a natural fluctuation. They even had 2 people manage to go 4-1. One guy with Vanguard Spearhead did very well, and one guy with Ironstorm Spearhead did very well. But overall, the faction is really struggling. I mean, that's literally the one guy that did well was literally the only guy that ran Vanguard, and the one guy that did well with Ironstorm was literally like 1 of 3 people, and the other 2 players won 4 games, won 5 games between them. So Ironstorm's been like 4-1, 3-2, and 2-3 essentially. We spoke about Space Marines before. The situation hasn't really changed with them. This is a ridiculously low player number for Space Marines. 23 Space Marine players. I mean, there are more Chaos Knight players than Space Marine players. There are more Eldar players than Space Marine players. Why is this happening? Is it that Space Marines have suddenly dropped off and they're like a really unpopular faction, and GW finally needs to make Guard the poster child of the franchise? Well, yeah, obviously, but joking aside, it's because all of the Space Marine players, basically, it's the same thing that we talked about last week. Space Marines as a faction is suffering from brain drain. There is absolutely no reason to run your army as basic Space Marines. You are just missing out on additional units and additional stratagems and additional, maybe not additional stratagems, but you're missing out on additional units and additional abilities. So don't be Codex compliant. Be very Codex unfucking compliant, and you'll just do better. In summary, if you want to play Space Marines competitively, you take your current existing Space Marine army, and then you just say it's Dark Angels today. And the next time you say it's Blood Angels, and the next time you say it's Black Templars, and you just run it as what is currently the more powerful Codex Divergent independent chapter. All right, so we've covered Space Marines, so now it's time for the Orcs. Orcs. So the problem is they appear to have settled right down alongside the wreckage of the Titanic and of the Ocean Gate sub. They're not doing so well. 44% is slight improvement outside, from the average of 42%, but really we don't look like a 1 to 2% fluctuation doesn't really mean anything. At the end of the day, Orcs are a low 40% win rate army. A lot of factions would probably be like, don't be so ungrateful. But considering where Orcs were, the fall stings twice as much because they've traveled twice as far to get there. The way GW handled the Orcs, I think, is a very good case study in how not to do balance. They essentially preemptively nerfed a bunch of stuff, which they hadn't done in a long time, and they did it with Orcs. They preempted things like Green Tide being too powerful when it actually wasn't. It was a 4-on-1 army at best. Bully Boys did need reining in, but they broke the cardinal rule of they double nerfed. They've been really good at not doing that. I mean, whatever has been said about orcs before, it's the same again. And that's someone who, I think, rather than rehashing the same stuff week in, week out and talking about Bully Boys down the shitter and Green Tide down the shitter and everyone's back on the index attachment, blah, 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 blah. Nobody cares about that. Let's talk about two new things. Let's talk about two new observations that I have had myself. So firstly, after Bully Boys and Green Tide went the way of the dodo, there was a lot of talk in the orc community of Dreadmob being Dreadmob being the new place to go to. And unfortunately, we've been waiting quite a while now for Dreadmob to flex what it can do. And it's been drawing in a few more players here and there, and a lot of the orc players that I know locally have been trying Dreadmob out. But the reality situation is that Dreadmob isn't quite cutting it. There are a few interesting and maybe even potent combinations within Dreadmob, but there's not enough in that detachment to carry it all the way. And I suspect what's probably happening with Dreadmob is it's got like one stratagem where you get like full rerolls, and then the rest of the army is probably just rattling itself apart. But people are still trying it, but I think at this point it's safe to say Dreadmob ain't quite cutting it. Weirdly, we've seen a slight resurgence with the Big Hunt, but it's gone from 0 players to 1 or 2 a week. This time we've had 3. That's okay. And Cult of Speed seems to have had a good week this week, but last week there were like no players. This week there's 2. If it can consistently draw in a half decent win rate, that would be good. But it feels like the if I was to make an observation. So we talked about Dreadmob not quite panning out. That wasn't the promised land. Second observation, it really feels like the wind has been taken out of the sails of the competitive orc community. Before the codex dropped, or should I say, as we transitioned from index to codex and the first few weeks of the codex being around, there were so many orc players in my local community. I mean, I'm talking, the regular guys were there, but there were so many people that were busting out their orc armies, or so many people that were getting into the faction, and they weren't just getting into the good stuff. Like, people were running, Dreadmob, people were running Cult of Speed, people were running all sorts of wacky stuff, and it felt like there was a huge amount of momentum behind that release, and everyone acknowledged that Bully Boys was too good, and everyone was like, Bully Boys will get nerfed, but hopefully, it won't be too bad. Like, everyone's like, the GW used to like get rid of the make the feel no pain like a 5-up, or get rid of the feel no pain. That's about it, right? And now in my local area, we've gone from having every single tournament, big or small, guaranteed to have an orc player there. This was since the beginning of 10th issue, guaranteed to have an orc player there. How many After Action reports did you see where I always took on orcs? It got to the point where I could predict what the orc competitive lists were going to be, right? Since the codex dropped, when was the last time you saw in one of my After Action reports I faced orcs? Once? The Mimi double stomper list? That's it. All of the orc players in my area gone dormant. Bar 1 or 2 diehards who come out once every couple of months. I think the real impact of the Orc nerfs was not that Bully Boys went down and that Green Tide went down or anything like that. I think the implication is GW basically just castrated the community's enthusiasm. That's the main takeaway from all of this. And Orcs, which are normally a very popular faction, are now, you know, they're okay. Those are okay player numbers. But it's not what it once was. How would I improve Orcs? How would I improve Orcs? That's the big question. How would I improve these struggling factions? More than anything else, Pacific has a player personality out there. And Orc players are feeling players. Orc players are vibe players. Orc players just want to know that they are loved and just want to know that they can do cool shit. GW, you don't need to necessarily buff Orcs. A few buffs here and there, even a few points decreases wouldn't, you know, unlike AdMech, Orcs are one of those factions where you can almost continuously decrease the points because it feels right for that faction to be big and gnarly and green. Big, mean and green, right? But what Orcs need is their mojo. Orcs need things to be fucking interesting. And right now things are not interesting for Orcs because the best attachment is the one that they've been using for over a year. And they're bored of that. They want to do cool shit. So the way I fix Orcs is almost not through tactical fixes, it's through vibe fixes. Make them interesting. Tweak some of the rules. Give them reasons to come out and try. I wouldn't necessarily buff it, but I would like rewrite nearly all the detachment rules. Just make them different. Doesn't need to be better. Make them different. Make them interesting. And the moment you do that, guess what? The Orc players will come out again and they'll try all of the new detachments just to see what they fucking do. Give them vibes. Give them things that they can sink their teeth into. That's how you get this Orc community to bounce back. And that's how. And the win rate almost doesn't matter. It's get those Orc numbers, those Orc player numbers popping again. Moving on to a faction which I think GW has done a phenomenal job on. And if I had to vote for best codex, I would say 10th edition Chaos Space Marines. It's phenomenal. Phenomenal codex. It is flavorful and powerful. It has so many different attachments to choose from. Many of them are absolutely tragically dog shit, and yet people bring them out every single time. And there's a couple of really good attachments that any Chaos Space Marine player can just fall back on. Just when, you know, when they want to feel powerful, they can run one of the good detachments, and when they want to unleash their creative juices, they can do that. This is what I'm talking about when you have vibe fixes. Give Orcs this many detachments, give Orcs this kind of treatment, and you'll see things bounce back. This should be the template for how every codex should be. Fuck getting 2 or 3 or 4 detachments. Every fucking codex should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 detachments. That's how you make a codex. And have 2 or 3 detachments be good, and have all of the other ones fucking interesting. And that's Chaos Space Marines right now. So let's have a look. Let's dive into the nitty gritty. So Chaos Space Marines, despite the fact that they've been on a 45% win rate week in, week out for like over 2 months now, no one is saying Chaos Space Marines are weak, because they're not. Chaos Space Marines absolutely have the capacity to win tournaments. Look at this. They won 2 tournaments this weekend. They had 7 players out of 41 go 4-1 or better. That's great. That's awesome. They had at least someone turn up with every single one of their detachments. Awesome. Some of their detachments performed very well. It is now fairly well established that Chaos Cult is a phenomenally powerful detachment. It had a 91% win rate this week, and both players who ran it went 4-1. Well, there was 2 players that ran it. One person went 4-1, and one person, I think, went 6-0. or 5-0 basically. But that's awesome. Chaos Cult is a really, really powerful detachment. The barrier to Chaos Cult is, do you want to paint up 100+ cultists? Most people don't. So, but Chaos Cult has been doing really well for a while now, but no one's complaining about it because it's fucking cool. It's a Chaos Cult detachment, and it's not really no one's really complaining about it because it's not really affecting many metas at the moment. Most people are, if you come, 99% of people who encounter Chaos Space Marines at a tournament are going to encounter Renegade Raiders or something a bit wacky like Dread Talons. But like that's what they're going to encounter. But that's fine. This is a good example of like a powerful detachment that people don't mind being powerful. That's also flavorful. Maybe it needs raiding in a little bit, but it's not so good that everyone is rushing out and it's not becoming oppressive in the big picture. In terms of where the main power of the codex is coming from, this is I would describe as niche power, as sort of an outlier. Where the main power of the codex is coming from is pack bound zealots, which it doesn't have super high player numbers, but it does consistently bring in probably the second most players to the faction, and it does have a fairly reliable 4-on-1 rate. Sometimes it spikes like this at 55%, but that average of 46% doesn't surprise me. Just in the Goldilocks zone. Soulforged Warpack, we're seeing people. Someone actually managed to go 4-on-1 with that. I did hypothesize that could have the potential to be quite a good detachment. It doesn't seem to, this I would say is a bit of a spike. And if you look at it, there were 2 people that ran it. One person went 4-on-1, the other person went 1-on-4. Some pretty big extremes there. Dread Talons. Okay. Dread Talons is one of those factions, is one of those detachments where every single week someone turns up with it. Every single week, 1, 2, 3 people turn up with it. And every single week, those people get completely fucking filled in. I mean, this week was a 44% win rate for those 3 guys. And that was considered a really good result for Dread Talons. Really good result. They're sitting on an average of 30% over 9 weeks. So why do people keep turning up with them? Well, 2 reasons. Firstly, one of the best-selling Black Library books of all time is the Night Lords Omnibus. So pretty much everyone who's going to read that is going to get Dread Talons. And secondly, because despite the fact that it is built around Battle Shock, and despite the fact that Battle Shock isn't a particularly impactful mechanic, Dread Talons is one of those attachments where you only need it to work once. You can go to a GT and play 5 games, and out of 4 of those games, it doesn't go off. The combos don't happen. It just doesn't play out. But in 1 game at that GT, you start battle shocking the fuck out of people. You're stopping them from scoring primary. You're screwing over their vital stratagems. And 1 game, the symphony plays. 1 game, the art comes together. The painting, the portrait is painted. 1 game, it flows like the well-oiled machine, and it all comes together. And Dread Talon players are chasing that high, and they get that high. 1 game every tournament, they'll get that high. 1 game every GT, they'll get that fucking delectable, delightful experience. And because Dread Talons is one of those Dread Talons is like Deceptors. It's fucking awful, and you are going to lose pretty much every game with it. But the moment that you bring it all together and win 1 game with it, it becomes one of your fondest hobbying tournament memories. There you are. So everything I said about Dread Talons applies to Deceptors as well. I am planning on going full hardcore Deceptors at some point, and I'm just losing every game and having a great time with it. Veterans of the Long War, it's just I think a little bit. Veterans of the Long War has struggled to cultivate a community. Occasionally someone runs it, because it's basically like running Space Marines. And if you want to run Space Marines, you'll play Space Marines. Warhammer Siege-Host, despite the fact it is consistently awful with a 33% average win rate, a 34% average win rate against this week's 33% average win rate, it's Iron Warriors. And Iron Warriors have got a very, very loyal following. So you'll always have some people turning up with Warhammer Siege-Host, which is cool. But the big one, and the reason I've saved this till the end, because there's nothing really new to say about this one, is Renegade Raiders. Pack-bound Zealots is if you want to play competitively, but you want to mix things up. Chaos Cult is if you're really, really just into that sort of niche skew tournament winning list. Renegade Raiders is the bread and butter. It's the bread and butter of competitive Chaos right now, and it's solid. And look, 21 players ran it. It might have only had a 41% win rate this week, but it had more players than all the other detachments combined, and someone managed to win a tournament with it. Renegade Raiders is what you run when you want to win tournaments. And you want to do well. It just does a little bit of everything. And it feels good to run. But this is the thing. Look at this. Multiple detachments with a few people. I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm going to sum it up. Chaos Space Marines is the best codex of 10th edition so far, because it has a lot of teeth for those people that like teeth. And it's got an incredible amount of flavor for those people that like flavor. Okay, moving on. Blood Angels. I am not going to spend a huge amount of time on Blood Angels because their meta is in limbo. The codex is just around the corner and it is going to be released soon. We are basically seeing the last bits of the current Blood Angel meta play out. If I was to give a hot take on where I think the new Blood Angel meta is going to go, it's going to look very, very similar. Right now, the current Blood Angel meta is to have a number of bricks, 10-man Marine bricks, which and the skill with the army, which are very fast moving. And the skill with the army is with staging. If you saw today's MG video, the skill with Blood Angels right now, the meta Blood Angels right now, is how good at staging are you? I do not think that is going to change for Blood Angels. I think what is strong in the current meta is going to be strong in the new meta. Not necessarily specific units. I think we will see Sanguinary Guard definitely take their place. Definitely step up to the plate, I should say. But I think you will still see big bricks of 10 Blood Angels being supported by a character, and I think you will still see big bricks, I think you'll start seeing bricks of like Sanguinary Guard around, and I think the competitive Blood Angels meta is going to be 3 to 4 bricks of jump pack Marines slamming into the enemy, whilst a few cheap secondary scoring units run around being cheap and scoring secondaries and holding primaries. Alright, so what do we got next? Ah, yes. The Adeptus Custodes! Yes! Custodes started off 10th edition kind of lame, and then they started abusing the fuck out of fixed objectives. And then GW took that away from them and basically reconstructed their asshole with a Guardian Spear and released the Codex, which everyone hated. And it turned out that everyone hated the Codex, but it turns out that not only did everyone hate the Codex because they didn't like the fluff, but they also hated the Codex because it was just kind of badly written. And the rules were kind of shit. That's okay player numbers in the grand picture of things. That is tragically low player numbers for Custodes. Like, that's bad for Custodians players. Custodians are normally the most played faction. Hands down. They are the most... Well, even when they are only remotely good, when they have like one good build, they are one good, one interesting build, you'll still see them with like 70, 80, 90 players. Like, they'll have more players than the best faction at the moment. And I think, as we're seeing, as I seem to be saying with a lot tonight, maybe that's a bit of an indictment of potentially some areas of 10th edition. The level of like perfection that they have can be quite interesting, and they do have some potentially like quite grim dark lore and everything like that. You know, they are. I'm not saying their lore isn't interesting. They're just fucking boring to play right now. I mean, Custodians are a faction which it's hard to get excited about, and it's nothing to do with the lore. It's nothing to do with the player base. It's just like you take a few Custodian infantry, throw them on the board, and that's it. You know what makes Custodians interesting? When they've got their wacky fucking dreadnoughts stomping across the battlefield. What makes Custodians interesting? When they've got fucking birdmen descending on you. What makes Custodians interesting is when weird fucking like flyers flying around. And they've got like crazy like hover tank. Ironically, what makes Custodians quite interesting is pretty much all the Forge World stuff. They don't really have any of that. Like, I'm going to say something which maybe a lot of Custodians players disagree with here, but I think the coolest looking Custodians infantry are the Sagittarium. The guys with the fucking guns. They're cool. Do you know what I think is the coolest? Do you know what I think is the coolest looking Custodians unit? Goddamn dreadnought with a shield and a sword. It's cool as fuck. I'll never forget the first time I saw a Custodians tank, the Caladius tank. I saw that thing and went, "What the fuck is that?" That is so different from any other tank that I have seen. It looks like it almost doesn't belong in 40k. It's so otherworldly. It's crazy. It's like it's a completely different aesthetic. And it turns out that if you don't encourage people to take the Forge World stuff, those feel kind of boring on the tabletop. So that's why we're seeing dwindling. And also, I guess, you know, when your codex comes out, you take one look at it and everyone just goes, "I'm going to go back to playing the index attachment." But if you've been playing the index attachment 15 months at this point, it's a long time. Play one army, very limited play style, same fucking rules, week in, week out. Again, they're a detachment which has they're an army with one viable detachment, and the viable detachment is the same one as the fucking index, so people are just bored of running that detachment. So, Imperial Knights. Now, we sort of covered Imperial Knights when we talked about Chaos Knights, so we'll just cover them here briefly. Imperial Knights are having a little bit of a resurgence. We're seeing more players jump over to them. I suspect that we're seeing a bit of brain drain from Chaos Knights over to Imperial Knights. The Imperial Knights do seem to be panning out as being the more balanced, the more powerful of the two knight houses, of the two types of knights. At the end of the day, Imperial Knights are, I think Imperial Knights are comfortably settling in to being the gatekeepers, their traditional role. They're a stat check. Do you have enough anti-tank to beat them? Then you're good. And if you don't, then you're bad. And I think this really reflects the fact that their average win rate is reflected by the fact that average win rate is 49% over the last 9 weeks, and that they've got 40 players, and yet only one of them went 4-1. 39 players went 3-2 or worse. Basically, 39 players went 3-2 or 2-3. Tau. Now, at the risk of being lynched by the Imperial Guard community, I quite like where Tau are right now. I quite like where Tau are right now. They're all, in many ways, they're a little bit like the mirror that's being held up to factions like Custodians and in weird ways factions like Chaos Space Marines as well. So Custodians have only got one viable detachment. Tau have got 3 viable detachments. And in comparison to Chaos Space Marines have got like 1 to 2 good like competitive detachments, and then lots of flavorful detachments. Tau, their detachments are somewhat flavorful. They're flavorful enough. I mean, Monk Cat is early game. Kion is late game. Retaliation Cadre is deep striking, high risk, high reward. The Kroot one's pretty Krooty, although they have chopped the legs out from under, which is a bit of a shame. So I think Tau are whereas Chaos Space Marines is this eclectic mix. It's like a minestrone soup, okay? Where it's fundamentally a soup, but you've got lots of little different chunks of it, and some of the soup is just basically like the watery broth. But the best bit of the minestrone soup is like the little bits of like pasta and little bits of meat and all that kind of stuff in it. And you know, the pasta and the meat is like your chaos cult and your renegade raiders. That's the bit that, you know, you really enjoy. But there's a lot of like watery shit in there as well, which tastes nice but isn't that powerful. Tau is kind of like your cream of tomato, which is a bit of a shit analogy, but bear with me. Kind of like your cream of tomato. Overall, it's, you know, individual parts of it aren't better than individual parts of the minestrone, but you take a spoonful from there. That's good. You take a spoonful from there. That's good. Basically, Tau is a really good example of how Games Workshop has got 10th edition right. They've released a faction. They have, I mean, look at how well they handled the Tau release. Look at how well I would say they've handled the Tau Renaissance. That's what it is. It's the Tau Renaissance. Tau went from being a one-dimensional, hated faction, which just blew people off the table and had one play style. From 7th edition to 9th edition, from 6th edition to 9th edition, it was Riptides, battlesuits, drones. That was the only thing you saw for like a decade. That's the only thing you saw for Tau. And then 10th edition's come out, but everyone hated that because it was really boring and frustrating. It wasn't boring. It was never boring. It was just incredibly frustrating to play it. And it was very samey. It was like, oh, another edition, another Riptide spam. Now, with Tau, I'm sure Riptides are still being taken because they're quite cheap and they're very effective. But, you know, now with Tau, you're seeing, when the faction, you know, with 10th edition, with the Index, they basically made them like Xenos Guard. So we're going to really, you know, bring the points down on Tau. We're gonna make them better, not by giving them loads and loads of wacky special rules and all sorts of crazy war gear. We're gonna make Tau better by giving them solid data sheets. We're gonna give them mid data sheets, mid rules with low points costs. You know, when I was playing my guard into Tau, when I was playing with Tau, I was like, holy shit, man, I'm cramming a lot into a list. I'm out. Sometimes I get to outnumber the guard as Tau. So they basically guardified the Tau, which has done very well for them. And then, they set that baseline. And then they've started making the faction actually fucking cool, because look at all the new releases for Tau on 10th edition. It's all auxiliary stuff. For decades, people have been telling GW, just release more auxiliary shit. We want to see the weird, wacky, waving, inflatable arm flating tube men, alien races. We want to see the goddamn melting pot, which is the Tau Empire. I want fucking tentacle monsters. I want floating balls of gas. I want psychic brains. I want fucking orc mercenaries. I want human mercenaries. I want weird shit, man. The Tau Empire, I want my Tau Empire army to have like 3 fucking Tau units, and the rest of it should be a little bit of everything, of all this weird eclectic shit. If GW, if you've ever had like a weird idea for an alien race, don't make a whole fucking faction around them. Just give them like one squad and shove them into the Tau, and make them cool. And GW is doing that because we've had a huge Tau Ranger Fresh, which was all Kroot, and then we've just had new Vespid models which look phenomenal. So hopefully, what GW has done with Tau is how factions should be reimagined. How factions should be fundamentally changed. I mean, compare Tau to Custodes. But, you know, Tau are very different to how they've played in the past. No longer are you spamming drones. You can't even take drones. Drones don't exist. Guys, just think about that for a moment. Drones don't exist. how many editions of Tau drones been a fucking pain in the dick? Too many. They get rid of the drones. Suddenly, the faction's kind of fucking cool. Kind of interesting. So, I know I've not spoken much about the power of Tau, and that's because really not much has changed. But this sort of Metawatch has been less about like how a certain faction's doing. And with some factions where it's same shit, different day, we've been talking about the bigger picture. And with Tau, the bigger picture with them is their power is fine. They're still sitting at 46% this week against an average of 47%. Their player numbers are fine, coming at 33. Totally solid for that faction. They've got 5 people going 4-1. They've got a nice even spread of players across their 3 main detachments, Kayun, Retaliation Cadre, and Montcar, with 9, 13, and 11 respectively. Every single detachment has had someone go 4-1, and every single detachment has got win rates within 4% of each other. From a power point of view, from a balance point of view, Tau are doing great. From a flavor point of view, Tau are doing great. From an interesting point of view, Tau are doing great. Overall, I never thought I'd say this, but I'll seem okay now. And I play with them, I play against them. This is from the guy who made an 1 hour and 5-minute rant video about why I fucking hate Tau. The moment that the Tau start fucking up again, I'm going to lambast them. But right now, and they do have some problems, Tau Seeker Missiles, they maybe get too many Tau Seeker Missiles. Maybe if I was to rein Tau in one way, I would make it so every vehicle gets 1 Seeker Missile. So for those of you being like, oh, Tau glory, nah, man, like, it's not that I suddenly want to have a big titty Tau girlfriend. It's just that this is something, let's be serious for a moment. Just for a moment. I know you guys want to meme on me, but let's be serious for a moment. I have, in the past, been accused of being a GW shill. And I have been accused in the past of being just hating GW for the sake of it. But that has never been my stance. One thing that I've always maintained, when GW does something good, I praise them. And when GW does something bad, I will lambast them. I used to hate Tau. For the first time in history, Tau are not the worst faction to play against. And frankly, this is the best Tau I've ever been. And do you want to know? Do you want to know how GW fixed Tau? Do you want to know the most beautiful, delectable part of it? Tau are good now. Tau are fine now. Because Tau are basically reskinned Imperial Guard. Proof that if the entire game was just different flavors of Guard, 40k would be the best game out there. Tell me I'm wrong, man. Tell me I'm wrong. You can't. Not possible. There you go. Deathwatch players, where was this commitment 6 months ago? I swear to God, if you guys had shown this kind of balls 6 months ago, you'd still have a fucking standalone codex. Deathwatch coming in with the most players we've ever seen in the entire edition, coming in with a 48% win rate, showing that the faction with Vanguard Spearhead and Black Spear Task Force, both having very respectable win rates. 42% is not bad considering where Deathwatch were. Vanguard Spearhead having a 56% win rate. Fuck's sake. It's like Deathwatch players, upon seeing that their faction's about to get squatted, for 3 weeks in a row now, have been showing everyone why they deserve to live. It's like, what? So Deathwatch players, another week of them proving that they will not go down without a fight. They will not go quietly into the night. And Deathwatch players, we are all saluting you as you go on one final epic charge, Leroy Jenkins style, into the Eye of Terror, man. You go, you beautiful bastards. You go. Grey Knights. Now, we actually covered a lot of Grey Knights before, where we talked about how the big problem with Grey Knights is... So Grey Knights from a power point of view is absolutely fine. We'll summarize it here. Grey Knights from a power point of view is absolutely fine. But, 49% win rate, or, on average against a weekly 49% win rate, 35 players, 7 of which are able to go 4-1. That's 20% of players going 4-1. Grey Knights are really just suffering from... They're one of the factions that GW got wrong with 10th edition. They don't feel like epic psychic knights anymore. they feel like Space Marines attached to a yo-yo. And Grey Knights, they're very uninteractive and they're very unfun. And I think Grey Knights are a faction that really needs reimagining with 10th edition, because right now they're kind of just losing their identity. There have been many, many, many other factions and many, many, many other Space Marines which have done jumpy up and down shit before. That was never the unique thing about Grey Knights. Okay, Blood Angels used to be able to jump up and down all the time. Fucking Death Watch, Teleport Iron, jump all over the place. Teleporting around isn't the USP of Grey Knights. It's something. It's one of their P's, but it wasn't the USP of Grey Knights. The USP of Grey Knights is they were the most psychic Imperial faction. Now they can't do that. So GW, my opinion, the way you fix Grey Knight, that their power is fine. The way you fix the Grey Knight vibe, they need like 1,000 Suns mechanic, like Cabal, Brotherhood of Psychers. The more like psychic characters you have, the more like fucking Brotherhood points you can spend. Chaos Demons. Chaos Demons are an example of a faction that GW has got right with 10th edition. They have been kept fresh and interesting over the course of the edition. Their power is absolutely fine. They're on 50% over the last 9 weeks against 49% this week. Basically, yeah, like we don't care about 1 to 2% fluctuations. Every week, people go 4-1 with Chaos Demons. Every week, their player numbers are very respectable. Chaos Demons started out 10th, very monster mashy, and then they and the monsters you always saw were, you know, it was called Codex Bellicor for like 6 months. It was like Codex Bellicor. And then they started like tweaking, and as much as I shit on the rules commentary, then they added in the whole like Aurican stack, and suddenly we went from never seeing Great and Clean ones to now everyone's running Great and Clean ones, because Great and Clean ones are cool, great. And then we kept seeing like, but it was still like a variation of Monster Mash, but this time we had Great and Clean ones. And now they've changed it where you don't even see Bellicor anymore. And guess what? Fucking Corn Demons are running around, having a great time. And we're seeing more and more people start to try out, like, no, they're not necessarily super powerful, but we're seeing more and more people try out Mono Demon Gods. And hey, they're coming away with at least one win under their belt. So Chaos Demons are are like Guard. They're like a few other of the index factions that are still going around. GW has managed to consistently tweak them and change them to keep them interesting, and we've seen them go through several different playstyles. Now, some people might complain about them constantly being on the treadmill, but from a competitive point of view and from an index point of view, when you've only got one fucking detachment, it's not bad if you've had 2 different playstyles. If you've had like basically 2 different playstyles in a year, that's not so bad, because it's basically meant that over the last 15 months, you've had long enough to enjoy a playstyle, but it's not been so long you've got bored of a playstyle before something new and interesting is coming along. And the old playstyle still works. If you still want to play Monster Mash with Demons, you can do. It's just we're seeing people, you know, run Berserkers for the first time and not feel like they're basically wasting their time. So Chaos Demons, power-wise, fine. How they're doing this week, same as normal. Same as they've been doing since the beginning of the edition. But as is the theme with this Metawatch, Chaos Demons are a faction that's been got right. Because just as things have started getting stale, GW's managed to keep it fresh again. Dark Angels! Woo! Dark Angels are a faction which has been up and down a bit. As we know, because I have said it many times, Dark Angels Gladius Task Force is the best way to run Vanilla Marines right now. So hence why out of 31 players, 21 of them are running Gladius Task Force. From a power point of view, Dark Angels, in a funny sort of way, Dark Angels, they're trying to be like Chaos Space Marines. Appropriate because of the Fallen, but it's not quite right. It's not quite working. What do I mean by that? Dark Angels have got clearly a powerful build with Gladius Task Force, and clearly a lot of people are trying it. And Dark Angels have got lots of other detachments that they can draw upon. They've got all of the Marine ones, plus they've got the Inner Circle Task Force, plus they've got the Company of Hunters, plus they've got the Unforgiven Task Force. They've got like, 8, 9 detachments to draw from. The problem seems to be those other detachments, I don't know, they're not drawing people in. Inner Circle Task Force, 27% win rate and only 2 players is pretty bad. We're starting to see a bit of resurgence around the Unforgiven Task Force and the Company of Hunters, but it's pretty low with maybe a couple of players in each one. So on the one hand, I feel like there's a bunch of people just saying the Dark Angels when they're not. But on the other hand, when I look at Dark Angels Gladius Task Force, I do see a lot of iconic units in there. I see Deathwing Knights, which are like Deathwing, very Dark Angels. Deathwing Knights, very, very Dark Angels. So if I had to come down on one side or the other, I think Dark Angels have been through a bit of a tumultuous time. And if I had to pick between Dark Angels, Ironstorm, Spearhead, and I had to pick between Dark Angels, Gladiator Task Force, or Deathwing Knights, I think Dark Angels are in a better position than where they have been in the past. I don't think Dark Angels are fully healed yet. I'd love to see Ravenwing making a good comeback. But Dark Angels are going in the right direction. And GW seems to be... GW seems to be giving the faction their identity back, which is good. Space Wolves. Now, Space Wolves are another Marine faction that I like to lambast, but overall, it's hard to deny that GW. It's hard to deny that Space Wolves. It's hard to say that Space Wolves are a bad faction because they're not. For a long time, Space Wolves have had really, really good power. I mean, look at this. They're still, 49% win rate against an average of 53%. It's a little bit down, but a bad week for Space Wolves is a phenomenal week for a lot of the factions. These guys will still be bouncing around. They'll be bouncing around the low 50s for a while. And, GW, for a long time, it wasn't Codex Space Wolves. It was Codex Stormlands. But now that we've seen, Champions of Russ come out as a totally viable second playstyle, we're starting to see some real variety come back into Space Wolf lists. And as much shit as I like to give them, Wolf Jail might have been kind of boring because it was the only thing you ever faced when you play Space Wolves, but it did use a lot of real unique Space Wolf units. Thunderwolves, some people love them. I think they're kind of derpy because I prefer the more Viking side of thing than the Wolfy side of Space Wolves. But hey, they're an iconic Space Wolf unit and they've been using them since day one of 10th edition. So yeah, the elite Space Wolves do feel like Space Wolves. But what I took the time this weekend when I was at the tournament to have a look around at the Space Wolf armies that were being featured at the tournament, and there was some nice variety. And in fact, there was one Space Wolf army that really jumped out at me, and it was used by a chap called Alex, someone who I get on really well with, got a lot of time for, played a few times at tournaments. And he's a very good player, and I'm hoping to battle pot with him soon. His Space Wolf army wasn't all Thunderwolf cavalry, and his Space Wolf army was actually shitloads of infantry and transports. And he got a couple of good wins under his belt at that tournament. And I think he was running them as Champions of Russ rather than Stormlands Task Force, and that was great to see. So Space Wolves, they kind of went through a bit because it was just Thunderwolf cavalry. But if we're going to be sticking on brand for this Meta Monday, the Space Wolf meta at least has felt Space Wolfy. Necrons! So, Necrons. 50% win rate this week. 50% win rate the last 9 weeks. Still, top 10 faction? Probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not quite a top 10 faction. Okay, but GSC are weirdly up here, are they? Yeah, I don't really count. I mean, maybe you count them, but Necrons are a really solid faction. I suppose, in terms of power, not much has changed for Necrons this week. They are the 4-on-1 faction, and they are one of the most popular factions. However, I have 2 main criticisms of Necrons, both from a meta point of view from a vibe point of view. Firstly, I am quite tired of facing Hypercrypt Legion. It was quite nice when for a time it was almost, not quite, but it was almost 1-for-1 Hypercrypt Canoptic Core. And it was quite nice where not every game was against Hypercrypt Legion. Unfortunately now, it seems like every game is against Hypercrypt. Now, I'm not totally against Hypercrypt, because unlike Grey Knights, at least Necrons use their teleporting shenanigans to come and fuck you, whereas Grey Knights just blue ball you and edge you the entire game. Like, Necrons, they drop their vehicle, they drop their units down, and they fucking blast you, and then they pick them up and they drop down somewhere else and they fucking blast you. At least there's like fighting and interactivity like happening. But with you don't have that with Grey Knights. They just jump around to scoring points. But I'm kind of bored of facing Hypercrypt now. And I even get it from like a vibe point of view, because it represents the Necrons like phasing technology and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, okay, I get it. But what I think is currently lacking from the Necrons is not just the wacky, incredible technology part of Necrons. We need the other part of Necrons. And the other part of Necrons is the unstoppable. What made Necrons so cool when they were introduced in like Dawn of War Dark Crusade? You shot them, they fell over, and then before your eyes, you would see Necrons rebuilding themselves and getting back into the fight. Reanimation is a tricky mechanic to balance, because it essentially allows people to get like 3 units back. I do get that. But maybe it's the durability side of things. We need to see Necron phalanxes back. And a Necron meta where Silvertide, without Silvertide, feels kind of sad. Now, having said that, we have seen people really starting to pick up on Awakened Dynasty. And, we've got 12 people running it this time. And it's got a 40% win rate against a 46% win rate. So, Awakened Dynasty, we are seeing a bit of Silvertide back, but you're not really seeing people take the big warrior blobs anymore. So Necrons, they're not a bad faction in terms of power. They're not a bad faction in terms of vibe, but I think I'm just a little bit bored of Hypercrypt, and I think I'd like to see something a little bit different for them. I don't want them to be nerfed. I just want them to be mixed up a little bit. Black Templars. Honestly, nothing much really changing with Black Templars. It seems like everyone who is running Black Templars now, everyone who is still running Black Templars, because the player numbers have kind of fallen. We noticed this last week how Black Templar player numbers were kind of low. And Black Templar player numbers are still kind of low. And they've kind of been stagnating around sort of, between 15 and 20 for a while now. But the power of Black Templars has been fine for a long time, shown by this 50%. Black Templars, honestly, are just chugging along. And they are an example of a faction that GW's got right. Every Black Templar player, nearly every Black Templar player, is running Righteous Crusade, which is cool. We are seeing Black Templar players lean into things like Black Tide and getting results. That's cool. Black Templars are fine. There's nothing real new to say. Black Tide, the only thing to say is Black Tide seems to be making a bit of a comeback after a while, after sleeping for a while. And I'm very, very excited about that. Now, Guard. We've said it a few times, but Guard are eating good. Whoa. Honestly, I love playing Guard. That sounds very obvious, but that's not always been true. For much of my Guard playing career, playing Guard hasn't necessarily been enjoyable. Okay, playing Guard has often felt like sticking it to the man. Okay, that's what the Guard feels like. Rex, say the line. Every day in the Guard is like a day in the Corps. Every meal a banquet, every paycheck a fortune, every formation a parade. I love the Guard. So, day in the Corps, every day in the Guard's like a day in the Corps. I think it's a day in the Guard, day in the farm. Anyway. Point is that a lot of the time playing Guard, the appeal of it has been we've been really shit, but we play Guard because we're the underdog And we play Guard because we love the lore. And we play Guard because it's the fucking cool faction. Okay? But now, in 10th edition, and right now, in this point in 10th edition, Guard is really fun to play because there's just so much flavor, which is kind of ironic considering, you know, the state of the lore on like the cards. You get like 3 lines for each unit. But if you want to find the deep lore, when we talk about flavor, we're not talking about lore. If you want to find the deep lore, you'll go and read that on like, you know, the Warhammer wiki and all that kind of stuff. What I mean is the flavor is there with all of the viable playstyles. You can go to a tournament and you can run 60 cavalry and you will probably come away with a win, and you will have so much fun because that 60 cavalry army is going to play completely differently to the pure infantry army you ran last time, and to the pure tank army you ran the time before, and to the nice balanced hybrid army that you played the time before that. Truly, what makes Guard the best faction to play right now, it is possible to run all the different playstyles that you really want. And some of those playstyles are going to be shit, but you can physically run them, and some of those playstyles are going to be great, and you can physically run those as well. So Guard kind of, I think if I would say Guard is a faction that GW has got right, because Guard should have so many different ways to play, and not all of those ways should be equal, but they should have so many ways to play. Guard is the army which can do a little bit of everything, and guess what? Guard can do that right now. Now let's drill in. So Guard, they passed the vibe check. They passed the vibe check from day one. And I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. I think the reason why Guard is doing so good just since the beginning of 10th edition, why Guard has just fucking worked, is because we're built on very solid foundations. It's fundamentally all of our data sheets, bar a handful, all of our data sheets are just solid. They're just solid. Okay? There's very few bad data sheets in the Guard index. You'll look hard enough, you'll find plenty, but in comparison to the good data sheets, they're massively outweighed. Now, what is working for Guard right now? What's the strengths of Guard right now? What's the Guard meta right now? Well, we've gone from being very artillery heavy. I mean, I would say the first sort of full year, the first season of 10th edition with Leviathan, it was artillery and artillery accessories. It was manticores, it was basilisks, you know, points GW tried everything to fix it, but eventually they had to come out with the big nerf hammer and, you know, big nerf gun and blow the brains out of Guard artillery. Now Guard artillery is still fine, but it has now been put back inside Pandora's box, and it really is the support unit now. It's not the the main punch. And where the Guard meta has quite clearly evolved to is vehicles. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be running pure mechanized, although I do want to circle back around to that in a moment. But Guard vehicles are really the current meta for this season. The current meta, access to some of the most cost-effective armored units out there is really giving us a boost, and this is fantastic because this is accentuated by the fact that 10th edition is fundamentally a vehicle and monster edition with the durability boosts that have been handed out to a lot of vehicles. So yeah, I mean, Rogel Dawns, man. Look at a Rogel Dawn and then compare it to an Imperial Knight. And you might say that on balance, both of those units are pretty equal. Like a Rogel Dawn's pretty tough. It doesn't have an invulnerable save. A Knight's got a worse armor save, but it has got an invulnerable save. Rogel Dawn has fantastic firepower. And the Knight's got pretty decent firepower, but maybe a little bit better close combat, depending on which Knight you go for. And then you realise that the Rogel Dawn is half the points of an Imperial Knight. So Guard are really, I think, you're not necessarily, you're still probably seeing hybrid armies as the ones that are doing the best. A nice mixture of like, we're still seeing a few Bulgarians knocking around. You're still seeing the Lord Soul are fairly common. But the guard meta is definitely becoming more tank focused than artillery focused. And personally, I have been having phenomenal success and having phenomenal fun with going properly mechanized. So I'm talking the 6 dedicated transports, backing that up with 4 to 5 main battle tanks, a couple of cheap secondary scorers in the form of a couple of Scion squads, a couple of basilisks. I mean, honestly, I would say my favorite go-to guard competitive army right now, which is like pretty guaranteed to go 2-1. If you get practice with it, guaranteed to go 2-1 at an RTT, and 3-2 or 4-1 at a GT. Even against some of the very, very good factions. If you're well practiced with it, is Met Guard. Is 5 Demon Rusties, 6 dedicated transports, 2 basilisks, 2 Sand. And you don't necessarily need to lean into it that much, and that army does have some flaws where it does struggle in close combat. I'm not taking Rogal Dawns. It does, it can be very matchup dependent. But honestly, I'm not saying that list wins every game, but I'm saying that kind of list does really good. And I've been trying very many different iterations of that list. I've been trying out in a more recon format. I've been trying out with fucking death strikes. I've been trying it out with spamming autocannons. But really, it's at its core, it's mechanized guard. And really, I think it's, if we look at recon guard going 2-1, well, really, it was mech guard going 2-1, but just with a recon-y twist. And autocannon same, death strike same, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, mech guard. If I was to pinpoint one. If you want one playstyle outside of hybrid guard that I think is the best way to play guard right now, which has very, very good returns on investment, it is goddamn mechanized guard. Steel Legion players are vindicated right now, and I think the community is starting to wake up to what guard has to offer, because Imperial Guard. This week I've got a 50% win rate, and our win rate has been slowly but surely creeping in the right direction. It fluctuates, of course, and we shouldn't make too much out of a 2% increase over the average. But it's, before this update, guard were like 40 to 43% win rate, and now we're like 48 to like 51% win rate. That's kind of where we fluctuate between now. And 50% for guard over, an average of 48% is very, very nice. 9 players, or should I say 7 players went 4-1, and 2 players won tournaments. And let's see what tournaments they did win. 72 player 6-round GT. That's a big GT. Big GT with 6 rounds, that's verging on major territory. It needs to be about 100 for major, but it's verging on it. 85 player 5-round event in Germany. That's a big event. 2 big GTs. So Guard won the 4th largest event and the 2nd largest event of the weekend. And at the largest event, the Austin, Texas Open 6-round major, Guard podiumed with someone going 5-1, and Guard had 2 more players in addition to that get into the top 8. So we had someone with Guard go 5-1 and come 8th, go 5-1 and come 6th, and go 5-1 and come 3rd. Guard are now in a position where, thanks to us having some pretty fundamentally solid data sheets, and with our Born Soldiers being sorted out, it feels like we're right in the pocket right now. We're right in the slot. We have the potential to win RTTs. We have the potential to win GTs. We're probably not, in the eyes of the hyper competitive players, we're probably not like a very good faction because we're not winning like super majors, and I don't maybe Guard will win super majors, but I think, you know, winning large GTs is probably the extent of where Guard is. But what's great about that is so many people focus on, can your faction win a super major? I mean, that's where, if you ask people what defines the best faction, it's the faction that is winning the biggest tournaments. And yeah, I wouldn't dispute that. That probably does define what the best faction is, or what is the most powerful faction. But the best faction, to me personally, isn't in that hyper niche area of super major winning. Because the overwhelming majority, 99+% of Guard players, are never ever going to have any intention of going to or winning a super major. But for the everyman on the street, the every guardsman in the trench, for the players like you and I, who like Guard, and we like to try and do our best with the faction, there's never been a better time to play them. Because probably for the, you know, for many of us, going to a super major is not possible or not likely. But we can go to our local friendly game store and play in the local RTT. And Guard right now can win a local RTT fairly regularly. Not guaranteed, but fairly regularly. And if you go to one GT a year or one GT every 6 months, finally you can, you know, give the kids to the wife, and you can have the weekend off, and you can go to that GT with the boys. You can now take Guard and probably come away with 4-1. And if you're someone that's or 3-2, and if you're someone that's very well practiced and go to GT regularly, you can probably win that GT. So for people that like to play Guard on a regular basis and cut their teeth on the tournament scene on a semi-regular basis, Guard is perfect right now. Guard is tournament winning, and something that I've been exploring a lot this year is the more common day-to-day events like RTTs and GTs, and that's where Guard just feels so good right now. So fun. Fuck winning super majors. I don't give a shit about that. I don't give a shit about that. But I'm pretty fucking happy to go to my local game store, come away with a tournament win there. I'm pretty fucking happy to go to a local GT and come away with 4-1 or maybe even podium there. That's something that I can achieve, and that's something which is very achievable. And that's what I think Guard is doing for a lot of players right now. That's why we are seeing the most important number of all keep on rising. 51 goddamn players. Does that make us the most played faction of the weekend? Ooh. Think it might. More than Tyranids. More than Necrons. It's never been done. It's finally happened. I can confirm that Guard were officially the most played faction this weekend. And I always say, this is the most important number. This is the most important number to determine faction health. Fuck win rate. Fuck average win rate. Those numbers can be skewed by anomalies and all sorts of janky shit. Player numbers is the real true indicator. Guard being the most played faction. Now is our time! So there we go. In short, Guard are pretty good right now. Do I think Guard need a little nerf? No. I'm not saying that because I'm massively biased, honestly. Guard are right in the pocket. We're right in the slot. It's a very, very delicate ecosystem. I think Guard are in... If I was Games Workshop, I would leave Guard where they are for now. I'd tweak stuff around them, and then I would see where guards settle. And then I would consider, depending on if they fall or rise, then I would consider buffs or nerfs then. But right now, guard are right in the fucking pocket. They're right in the slot. Change them around them and see how that relatively affects guard. Yeah. Rodney Gore, Dawn, but Dawn might get a point, Hank. Maybe. It did just come down. It did just come down. Yeah, I honestly don't think guard is, I suspect guard isn't on GW's radar at the moment. They've probably got bigger fish to fry. Speaking of which, we've got World Eaters. I don't think World Eaters are particularly a high priority, actually, to be honest. 51% win rate against an average of 51% win rate, if I was going to be honest. I think World Eaters are probably perfect right now as well. They had 41 players, incredibly popular numbers. 5 people going 4-1, and World Eaters also won 2 tournaments. Which ones did they win? They won a 30-player event in Ireland, and they won a 40-player event in France. That's great. That's, World Eaters. That's exactly the kind of events that a niche faction like World Eaters should win. World Eaters are so niche that if they're winning like Super Mage and stuff, it just means they're overtuned. Because a faction which is fundamentally niche, which is going to have tools missing from its toolbox, probably shouldn't be winning Super Mages. I know that sounds a bit harsh, but you don't have everything that other factions have. So if you are winning Super Mage, it probably means that you're just massively overtuned. World Eaters and Guard are in a very similar place right now. The win rate is kind of solidifying around that 50%. The kind of events that World Eaters won this week are the kind of events that Guard won last week. I guarantee you next week it'll flip around again, and Guard will win a couple of smaller events. World Eaters will win a couple of bigger events. But no one's winning a Super Major with either of these factions. If I would say the biggest, I would say GW has got World Eaters. They've got World Eaters right from the beginning of 10th edition. Okay, so World Eaters feel like World Eaters. This is something we've really been focusing on in this Meta Monday. They feel like this meta has less been about like the win rate meta, and this Meta Monday, or Meta Tuesday I should say, has been more about the vibe meta. Okay, the feel meta. And I think that World Eaters, they pass the vibe check. What do you want World Eaters to do? They want to run at people, chop them up, blood for the blood god, skull to skull throne. World Eaters, a lot of the time should feel like a bit of a power trip. It's like, you are the combat army, and that's how you should feel. And I would say right now, World Eaters probably do feel like the combat army. There's probably very little that can go toe for toe with Angron. There's probably very little that can go toe to toe with like 8-bound. There'll be some things out there, and then in a funny sort of way, that's probably quite enjoyable for World Eaters in its own way. Challenge finally worth my attention. Opponent finally worthy of my blade. That kind of thing. But World Eaters, I think, do have one problem, which is they've been doing the same shit, not for all of 10th edition, but like since for almost 2 years now. Like we're getting on there. They really, like Votan, they really need a phase 2. And I'd say the biggest criticism of the army right now is it's starting to be a little stale. Maybe even a lot stale. If you've been playing World Eaters since day one. If you're just getting into the faction, of course, it's going to feel fresh. But for the hardcore World Eaters players, it's probably feeling a little stale. And it would be nice if there were competitive World Eater armies that didn't rely on Angron. Angron's probably too much of a crutch right now. So the World Eaters are fine. They pass the vibe check. They pass the power check. They're winning events, but they're not taking the piss. But they're one of those factions that are probably crying out for a codex. And they probably really want a codex that is got a bit of variety. Worst thing that could happen for World Eaters right now is if they got a codex and they got 4 detachments and everyone just, the best one was still basically the Berserker War. Yeah. Angron is cool, but he loses a bit of his impact when it's just, you don't go, oh my god, that's Angron. You go, oh yeah, it's Angron. Dark Elder. Dark Elder. 52% win rate this week against an average of 55%. They had 23 players, which is fine. They're a niche faction. It's fine. 3 players went 4. 2 players went 4-1. 1 player won an event, and the event they won, it was a 40-player event in Texas. 5 rounds. Fine. Dark Elder is a faction that vibe check, they pass it. So one thing that GW definitely got right with Dark Elder, with Sky Splinter Assault, it definitely wasn't right with Real Space Raid, is they made Dark Elder feel like Dark Elder again. And that's good. So lots of boats flying around, fast as fuck, but unbelievably fragile. That's Dark Elder. The one thing I can't make up my mind about with Dark Elder is, do they need a nerf? Because the average win rate is 55%, which is probably outside of the Goldilocks zone, really. Like, it's getting out there. And they have been a faction which has been a 50% or higher win rate faction for way longer than the last 9 weeks. They've been 50+% win rate every single week since Sky Splinter Assault came out. Does that mean they're perfectly balanced? They're exactly where they should be? Before I played them, I would have said that they definitely needed reining in a bit. After playing them, I can see it's the problems with the faction are very obvious. They do hit hard. They're so fast, but they just die. They pick up so much little scraplets of damage. Like, oh, a vehicle exploded here. Oh, well, it only does 1 mortal wound because the Sentinel. Well, yeah, it was in range of 3 units, and now I've lost 3 models because all my guys are 1 wound. Oh, okay. Oh, I've fired my stubber at you. Probably won't do any damage. Probably will do because the stubber is wounding my venom on 5s. What? They're probably fine because the amount of like scrap damage they pick up is wild. But a little tweak. I think they're probably one of those factions which, on a good run, can win a local event, but I don't see them as being super major winning. Sisters of Battle. After much beating of breasts and of much salt and concern and vitriol at the Sisters Codex, the faction received some pretty heavy nerfs and seems to have balanced out a little bit. Not as bad as everyone's saying it was. Everyone's saying it was 10th edition Eldar all over again. Definitely seems to have still been strong, yet not overwhelming. Got like, yeah, I think we've stabilized, to be honest. Yeah, I think you maybe need a little bonk with the nerf patch, just a little bit, because if not a bonk with the nerf patch, maybe a slight bonk to Bringers of the Flame specifically, and then maybe some incentives added to take some of the other armies. Sisters, they passed the vibe check, because running around with Sisters full of fucking like melter guns and flamers and being able to purge the enemy by bolt and blade, yeah, great. Okay, like Sisters definitely feel like Sisters on the tabletop. The weapon options you're taking feel right. They passed the vibe check. They got the feel. They feel like Sisters. Where I think Sisters have gone wrong is that Bringers of the Flame is too overwhelmingly obvious as the good detachment. Like 54% win rate, again, against an average of 54% win rate. 8 people going 4-1. Someone won a tournament with them. Out of the 32 players, 24 of them went Bringers of the Flame. What I want to see with Sisters is a slight decrease to Bringers of the Flame and a slight buff to all of these 3. Just a slight. Because I don't want to see one dude running Penitent Host. I don't want to see one dude running, 3 dudes running Hallowed Martyrs. I don't want to see 2 guys running Army of Faith. I want to see this kind of shit. 9, 13, 11. I don't want to see this kind of shit. 24, 2, 3, 1. The sisters, they pass the vibe check, but they really need the internal balance sorting out. And then we get to Death Guard. Now, I have made no Death Guards sneaking into the top 5. Now, I have made no bones about my sordid, syphilitic love affair with the Death Guard. Okay, like I've not hidden that. I fucking love Death Guard. Okay, and Death Guard being in the top 5 does make me kind of happy. I want to say it's probably a blip, but Death Guard have been really solid for a few weeks now. Like, you never see Death Guard consistently in the bottom 5 or bottom 8 or bottom half. Death Guard always hover around 48%. Death Guard definitely feel like Death Guard. They pass the field check, they pass the vibe check. 53% is probably a little bit of a spike, but 53% combined with 9 people going 4-1, Death Guard are one to watch. And they've got a lot going for them. Death Guard, like Imperial Guard, have got lots of solid data sheets, so they can kind of weather a lot of storms with that. Overall, if I was to sort of level maybe one criticism, they're a 4-1 faction, but they're not winning any tournaments. But they're alright. I like Death Guard. I think they're in a really good. I think Death Guard are in a really good spot right now. Tyranids, saying it incorrectly to annoy as many people as possible. Tyranids, 53% win rate is a big jump up for them this week. Their average is 47%. I imagine that Tyranids are probably not a consistent 50+% win rate faction. I think Tyranids are probably in that high 40%. But having said that, we've got 53% combined with 12 people going 4-1, which I think is the most people going 4-1 and this week, and 50 players. Look at Tyranids and Guard tearing it up. Guard 51 players, Tyranids 50 players, Guard 50%, Tyranids 53%, Guard 9 4-1s or better, Tyranids 12, Guard winning a couple of events, Tyranids not quite doing it, but they did have more people go 4-1 overall. Tyranids tearing it up, they're eating good. And we are starting to see a bit of variety coming in with the Tyranids. Now, it's still a little disappointing and a little stale that Invasion Fleet is still the go-to attachment for most, not most of the players, but for a lot of Tyranid players. But we are seeing a credible, second, like a credible heir, as it were, a credible second attachment with Vanguard Onslaught. A lot of people seem to be enjoying that. And I called this a few weeks ago. I said, keep an eye on Crusher Stampede. And guess what? Crusher Stampede has been going from strength to strength. It's gone from 1 or 2 people running it to now we're seeing, 6, 7. And I suspect we'll see more people running it. Crusher Stampede is great. Crusher Stampede being viable is great because a lot of Tyranid players like to run Nidzilla. It's a very old, long beardy tactic and a traditional tactic, and it being viable means Nids feel right again. Assimilation Swarm, it's not got enough people. It's not great, but hey, people ran it and did well with it. And Synaptic Nexus is kind of like, it's still trying to get off the ground. I guess the big sadness here with Tyranids is they only partially passed the vibe check. Because having a nice mixed Tyranid army do well is good. Having Nidzilla be viable is good. Having like super sneaky Nids be viable is okay. There's always one Nid player out there that wanted to run like pure like Gene Stealers and Raveners and that kind of stuff. So yeah, like those guys being catered for. The reason why I'm not going to give Tyranids a full passing grade on the vibe check is because where's the Swarm? Absolutely. Absolutely a Defion. Absolutely. GW needs to fix Unending Swarm. Because it's so fucking dumb that the Unending Swarm actually does end. Because you can't keep bringing them back. They need to fix Unending Swarm. And then Tyranids get the big gold sticker. But right now, they've got the power. They're starting to show a little bit of variety. And Tyranids are starting to feel very Chaos Space Marine-y. One detachment, which is obviously the better one that people are really leaning into. But a few other detachments, which are a little bit more flavorful. And are still able to get some results. If anything, Tyranids feel like a combination of Tau and Chaos Space Marines. They feel like Chaos Space because they've got one detachment everyone is favouring. They feel like Tau because a lot of the detachments seem to be producing some results. Yeah. But like, how do you fix Unending Swarm though? If you're not going to allow the Unending Swarm people to respawn units, then either you need to give the Endless Multitude units a deep discount in that attachment. So there should be like, you know how it says like in some attachments, if you take this unit is battle line, this attachment, there should be something that says in this attachment, this unit is minus 20 points to its cost or something. Or this unit has the following points cost. So you make Unending... So you don't make like Gaunts and Gants and stuff cheaper for all detachments. Because that might skew things for like Invasion Fleet. But you make it so in the Swarm, the data sheets are... the swarming bugs are cheaper. Yeah. Because that way you make it so that the Swarm armies are getting 2 or 3 extra units of things like Gaunts and Hormogaunts, like the fairly cheap stuff. And that way they're just going to put those things into reserve. A Defion, buff Tervigons, let them spawn their own units again. I feel like GW is moving away from free units. I did think that as well. But if we take it as read that GW doesn't want free units, then we have to think of how else they do it. And rather than making units free, you make them cheaper. One thing you could do is for each Tervigon that you include in your army. I mean, this is completely against what I just said. But for each Tervigon you include in your army, you get a free unit of Termagants. But those Termagants can only have flesh borers. And those Termagants must always stay wholly within 6 inches of their parent Tervigon. I also think that GW should release a new kind of Tervigon called the Hervigon, which lets you spawn Hormagons. But it should be really fast. The Tervigon should be like a big belly monster. The Hormagon Tervigon, the Hervigon, should be fast as fuck. Yeah. It should be the opposite. One should be like big broodmother. One should be like big, sort of sprinty thing. Let's have a look. Azuth, thank you for the 20 bits, mate. You give Gaunt units a regen as the detachment rule. Constant trickle of reinforcements. Yes. At the beginning of each turn, each Endless Multitude unit can respawn D3+3 models. That way, if you wipe the brood out, it doesn't come back. But if you don't, it starts regenerating. And you could combine that with Tervigon so they could regenerate a lot of models back. Alright, so after Tyranids, we have got Gene Sealer Gold. Hey! So, Bob the Gene Stealer, thank you for the 26-month member flex. X-Force, baby! Double X-Force, more than approved, mate. Vibe check, and then there was GSC, lol. So, let's talk about the GSC vibe. After an initial dip, I think this is the second week when we've seen Gene Stealer Cult doing weirdly well. So maybe they're not as bad as all that, or maybe all 9 people that ran GSC were able to roll those 5 up cult ambush things a little bit better. I think that Gene Stealer Cult has a really flavorful codex, and there's a lot of stuff. Gene Stealer Cult are probably an example of an army where they kind of focused on like cool shit first, but then they focused so much on like cool shit for the detachments that they completely fucking forgot about fixing the army rule, and then they released the codex and went, oh shit, we made it cool, but we didn't make them powerful. So Gene Stealer Cults, for me, they're all over the place in terms of my assessment of them. I think overall GW did the detachments right, but overall I think the army rule sucks ass, and I think that Gene Stealer Cults have actually shown, not every week, but they've shown more than once since the codex has come out that they do actually have some half decent power. Like, you know, this guy was able to go 3-2 with Biocentric Brood Surge. We had 4 guys run Host of Ascension, and they got a 55% win rate. Outlander Claw managed to get a 55% win rate as well, but there was only 2 guys there. Xenocreed Congregation, not great, but 45% win rate is fine. Again, only 2 guys. The problem with Gene Stealer Cult is that no one wants to play them. And no one wants to play them because I know that we say Warhammer is a dice game, but there's times when we have to just put that to one side for a second. And not like Miracle Dice because they're shit, and not like Fate Dice because they're shit. No one's going to play an army where if you roll a dice and don't pass a 5 up, you basically are going to lose the game. It's as simple as that. The reason Gene Stealer Cult are not popular on the tournament scene right now is not because they're a niche faction, because weirdly, a lot of people have Gene Stealer Cult armies as like a 3rd or 4th army. And historically, we have seen Gene Stealer Cult numbers spike surprisingly high. Like, we're talking like, I've seen 30 plus Gene Stealer Cult players, not in a 10th edition Meta Monday, but in like 9th edition Meta Monday when GSC got rebalanced and they started doing really well. It's not that people, it's not that Gene Stealer Cult are unpopular, because they're not. Everyone knows someone who's got Gene Stealer Cult. Gene Stealer Cult are unpopular because the army rule just makes them feel a bit shitty and unreliable play. And especially at a tournament, especially at a GT, where people may have had to travel and where people may have to put aside their limited time, no one's going to go to the effort of going to a GT. I do this gig, I do Warhammer full time as a living, and I still find it quite the do to organize like travel and accommodation and all that shit for a GT and everything. So no one's going to do all of that for an army where if they just don't roll 5 ups over the weekends, they just might as well not turned up. If you're going to go to a GT and you're going to spend your limited precious time on this earth, you're going to take an army that is going to do what you wanted. So long story short, Gene Stealer Cult are cool. Gene Stealer Cult attachments are cool. Gene Stealer being an expensive army isn't a problem. Gene Stealer's being a niche army isn't a problem. The army rule is fucked. They need to completely redo it. Simplest way, I don't know if it would be the most elegant way, and I don't know if it would solve a lot of problems. But the simplest way is get rid of the current cult ambush rule. Replace it so that every unit either has deep strike or has infiltrate, including fucking trucks, and then give the army like a 10% discount across the board. The other way you fix it, go back to 8th edition blips and give the army a 10% discount across the board. Yeah. They need to come out and admit that they fucked GSC. Yeah, sure. The army rules dog shit. Honestly, the easiest fix, bin off the army rule. They just don't have an army rule, and give them a 20% discount across the board. There you go. It would make them pretty fucking hordy, but that's what they should be. GSC. When was the last time you've played against a Gene Cynical army that outnumbered you? That tells you that they've got it wrong. Gene Cynical always used to outnumber you. It used to be waves after waves of models coming out the walls, but if you could survive the first couple of turns, they lost steam and you could beat them turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. That's where GSC need to go back to. Okay. Leagues of Cheese. Leagues of Votan. These guys are in the elevator right now. They are up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Leagues of Cheese. I don't know if they're top. I mean, they made it on the podium this time. If I was to... Let's go through the raw data. Leagues of Votan. 55% win rate. 5 people going 4-1. They've got an average of 49% win rate. And they've got 26 players. 55% win rate to me screams a spike. 5 players going 4-1 is interesting. But no one won any tournaments with them. And an average of 49% win rate makes me think that Leagues of Votan are fine right now. If I was to say where I think the Leagues of Votan meta is evolving to, everyone and their mum is busting out the Hecatons. Hecatons are amazing. Hecatons are cheaper than Land Raiders. And better than Land Raiders? Like, if I could take Hecatons in like a Marine army, I fucking would. They transport stuff, and they have big guns. And they have the same save and wounds as a Land Raider, but they're like 215 points or something crazy. Yeah. So Hecatons... points maybe. Don't know if you've looked at the box. Yeah, they're very expensive. But Hecatons, so Leagues of Votan meta for the longest time was 2 to 4 Sagittars, 1 unit of the Exosuit guys, a couple of 10-man units of the Dwarves, Terminators, a couple of units of Bikers. And now the meta seems to have shifted towards less of the Sagittars, less of the Terminators, and more of the Hecatons. But hey, this is 10th edition, so maybe Votan have finally got the message. Hashtag mech-up. If I was to point out 3... I don't think Votan need any nerfs. If I was to point out some weaknesses of Votan, I'd say they're definitely suffering from needing a second wave of models ASAP. They're super fucking slow, and the number one way you beat Votan is you take advantage of the fact they've only got a 24-inch range. 24-inch range you get into a range firefight with Votan, you can basically shoot them half to death before they even get to you. If, terrain allowing. And then we get to Thousand Suns. Oh, dearie, dearie, dearie me. Is this the second week in a row when Thousand Suns are top? Oh, look. I am Araman. I am the Grand Wizard. Not like that. I am the greatest psyker there is. Because I'm I'm the Grand Sorcerer. We'll go with that one instead. Because I predicted this. I said at the beginning of Pariah Nexus, I said that Thousand Suns were the new top meta army. that they were going to take the meta by storm. I said that all of the major barriers, all of the factions that were in their way, were now nerfed. And there was nothing stopping them from becoming the top faction. Boom. Look at that. 58% win rate. Over a 54% average. Second week in a row, they're at the top. 13 players going 4-1. Sorry, 11 players going 4-1. 2 players winning tournaments. And 36 players in total. That's player numbers on the increase. Win rates on the increase. A third of all players that took, more than a third of all players, about 40% of players that took 1,000 Suns went 4-1 or better with them. Why are 1,000 Suns so good? Because double Doom Bolt is fucking oppressive and obnoxious. And Magnus is fucking hard carrying the faction. And overall, they're just great. They do everything, man. They're elite, they're tough, they're fast, they're fucky. How do I rein in 1,000 Suns? Honestly, I would take a goddamn lawnmower. I'd take a goddamn thresher for the amount of Cabal points they have. Yeah. It's the Cabal points. The data sheets are all fine. That Magnus probably should be pretty tough. Immunity Vortex Beast, its only really thing is it's tough and that does a bit of damage. It's more of a booster unit. Yeah, it's the Cabal points that make everything a bit too spicy. How would I rein 1,000 Suns in? Just massively reduce the amount of Cabal points they have. Right now, they can just do everything that they want. They shouldn't be doing everything that they want. They should have to choose between double Doom Bolt and extra movement and getting like a free save or anything like that. Yeah, just make it so at best they get 2 out of the 3, not 3 out of the 3. All right. But that's all for now. Thank you all for joining. Hope you enjoyed it. And of course, as always, see you guys next time. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.